Hi everybody, welcome to this week's edition of Not Another Tooling podcast with myself and my wonderful co-host, Mr. Matt Malcolm. Matt, how are you this week?
I'm good, but you know what? I haven't used this treadmill realistically for about 3 weeks, and it's squeaking so much at the moment. Hopefully that dulls down, but right now I'm good. I've had a bit of a squeak.
So for those of you who are new to the podcast, Matt is always on his walking treadmill. Pretty much, it must have done at least 1,000 miles on these podcasts, I think. So it keeps him incredibly trim, as you can see. But Matt, before we dive into today's session, which is all about the cost of change for enterprise tooling, do you want to just tell our wonderful audience a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So ultimately been in and around the enterprise tooling space for must be heading towards a couple of decades now. Anything from admin a tool, supporting it, consulting in it, designing it, selling it, and also making a load of mistakes with tools as well. So yeah, most spectrum of the enterprise tooling I've had a dabble.
Wonderful, thank you very much. And I'm Austin Pearson, and I have actually, do you know what, it's 20 years for me this month that I've been in this space. When I started at IBM many years ago, so I've been advising clients for 20 years all over the globe in this enterprise tooling space. So hopefully we've seen the good, the bad and the ugly between us. For sure. So plenty to share with you today. So we're going to talk about the cost of change for enterprise tooling. And this is a big subject. And I know we both have a lot of interesting challenges around this, because I don't think I've ever had a client who's budgeted appropriately for changing tools. And most of the time that leads to them having dissatisfaction somewhere along their tooling change journey. But when we were talking about this the other day, Matt, you had some good thoughts about, just setting the scene. Where do you even start before we get to this, cost of change? Why would somebody want to change? What would they need to do before they were ready to do so?
Yeah, I know we've had many conversations on this. I think the notion of change is a scary one, and sometimes takes a massive leap of faith to even go down that path. But I think there's definitely always a consideration to having to look to see what is out there. So not necessarily do the change, and just see what's out there. And it might well be that you don't need to change, but at least you've understood what you need to be able to do. But ultimately, it comes back to like, what do you need to be able to achieve from the capability you're considering changing? What's the map? What's the business objectives? What you're trying to do? Can you do that with your current stack, whatever it is, or variations of? If not, what's out there that can do it? So it's going to be a business-led decision versus what we do see still now. Is it be golf course decision or vendor, webinar, whatever session? Ultimately, the wrong approach. Look at it from a business decision point of view, and if you've got that, then you're going down the right path. And sometimes you still might not need to change, but that's a slightly separate conversation. I might raise it, I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely spot on there. Although I can't remember the last time anyone did business on a golf course. You must have some better vendors than I deal with to get invited out on the golf course. But nice. Okay, so let's say you've made the decision. Then you've decided that something in your tool chain is going to change, whether it's ITSM, monitoring, log analytics, whatever it is. It's ready for change. You've worked with the business to understand the business drivers, i.e., you're looking to improve revenue as a company, or drive out additional costs, or improve your MTTR so that you improve your NPS scores. You've understood the impact that is going to have on IT and the KPIs that you're looking to move, and where they are today and where they need to get to. And then you've gone out to the market, you've narrowed it down to 2 or 3 things, and you're starting to get your internal business case together. what should be on that business case other than a line item for software and professional services to implement that most people don't put on there?
I'm gonna, like, as I do sometimes, like, not answer your question straight away. And only reason because, like, obviously we're talking about change here, and this is the main topic, and that move. You know what? Sometimes maybe just don't change, don't move. And what I mean by that is, like, you still need to understand what it is you want to achieve. What's that business goal? That stuff. You still need to justify to get to that point. But sometimes, like, the existing thing that you've got can probably do it, and it might not be able to clearly, visibly do it. You might look at it and go, bag of tools, let's see the market and do all the exercise. Do the exercise to understand what's out there and what things could look good. But maybe you don't need to move. Maybe having a good conversation with your existing vendor or supplier or whatever else can actually move you to that business objective. And I'm saying that from recent experience. So for my retail company, I needed a potentially new warehousing and fulfillment option is what I need to look at. So immediately I was on the market to go and look. And I thought, no, what I'll do is have a sensible conversation with the existing supplier, see what could be done. Ultimately, lots of alternative options to deliver the service that are needed based on what my thoughts were, price point as well, all with the same supplier. And now I don't really have to consider making the move. I can still meet my business objectives by staying with the same stuff. But I wouldn't have known if I wouldn't have had the conversation. So yes, we're talking about transition and moving, and there's still transformation costs to move that, right? There still needs to be something. But sometimes maybe you don't need to move. That's anyway, so I should answer your proper question. Really, probably into a few buckets where my mind was going. The two main buckets is going to be, and there's probably a few little splinters of it, is products and people. I'll probably pass to you to sort of fill in some of those gaps, because I've certainly got some suggestions, but the easy buckets, I think, to start to think about is going to be products and people.
Yep, I would agree with that. So let's take the people one first then. So you've got your line item for professional services to implement. What other people costs do you see that need to be added in as a cost of change?
You know, I know we weren't like necessarily going to do any prep for this conversation, but I did think about something. And I'm just thinking the best way I can answer these questions is all the mistakes that I've probably actually made myself. From a people perspective, and I don't know where it exactly falls into categorization, maybe enablement, maybe engagement, is the awareness of what's happening at the back end. Yeah, we're dealing with the transition and we need to get this stuff done, the project and all, however it's fulfilled. But what's happening at the back end? Who's it going to? How's it going to get there? And then what I mean by that is, if the people it's going to go to are around now, they need to be engaged now, because as part of your transition, you don't got to wait to the end of the traditional transition models, right? You get the end of it and go, not this transfer, fucking bullshit. That doesn't work. Really bad taste of like, what's this new thing? Maybe they've been engaged in a few meetings. Then you got to throw a product out of the fence, whatever it looks like. Really grabbing that people element right at the beginning, maybe even pre-product selection, depending on, you know, how it needs to go. Doing it at that side gets them on board all the way through. And maybe they don't have the skills or acumen to be able to deploy and progress this product, whatever it might be. If they're engaged right the way through, that mythical KT and knowledge transfer and handover at the end of the project, it doesn't need to happen, doesn't matter. It's happened all the way through. So that's a mistake I've observed myself personally, time and time again, is the KT side not taking place actively throughout rather than at the end.
100%. This is definitely something I've seen in some big projects recently. I think there's two parts to that, right? There's this kind of stakeholder piece of really understanding who your stakeholders are, and that should be way pre-making a decision, right? Because they need to all be engaged as to what the outcomes are they're expecting. But then there's this piece of, you often have kind of architects and people that build stuff, and then they hand it over later to run operate team, and they're like, hang on a minute, this isn't quite what I was expecting, what I need, and I don't work like that, and whatever, which means you need to build in some of their time and therefore cost for that into the early stages of the product. to make sure they're engaged. You know, if you've got 20 people running monitoring, for example, and you want to, then you might want to bring one of those in the journey and take them away from what they're doing today. Does that mean you need somebody new in to do that? You definitely need some people in there. I would agree with that.
So massive space in the people for the transitional, handovery, whatever elements. In relationship to that, a bit I said about are they there? And this is a mistake that not necessarily I've driven, but certainly received, is whatever that thing is, new product, new functionality, new whatever else, resource up straight away, man. Don't wait at all. Resource up so you know where it's going to be going to. And the reason why you want to resource up early on, yes, there's going to be some initial capital expense because you need to get somebody up and around to begin with. But I think where the mistake falls is you wait to resource up, and by the time you need to resource up, that resource onboarding takes its time. Normal full-time employee takes time. If you don't do it soon enough, you end up in a position where you've got to go down a service provider, a contingent labour, a contractor, consultant, a vendor, or whatever else, and it becomes super expensive to feed and water the thing because you haven't spent the time, or at least allowed enough time, to hire the right person in the right place at the right time. So resourcing up to, ideally, you've resourced up at the beginning of the project, and that same person, existing or new, is there throughout. But if not, you need to be looking at them sooner rather than later. So you've got a home for the product. Could be one, could be multiple, depends on the product. But doing that early, because if you don't do it early, what happens is you're paying premium rates, whatever that looks like, to do stuff with the product from day one. You can avoid it massively.
Yeah, I'd agree with that one. I think the third one for me is that you are going on a journey with this product over a number of years, and you want to continually improve what you're doing with that product because your business isn't going to stay still. You're going to need to change over time. So therefore, you want to put something in the budget so that you can take this solution with you over time. And having to go back year on year or month on month, quarter on quarter, and ask the business for more money to help you improve the tool further is often quite painful, and people just get a little bit annoyed. Oh, we spending even more money on that. Whereas if you've thought about it beforehand and saying, okay, this is, you know, an enterprise tool should be like a 7 to 10 year journey typically. Potentially even more than that, right? So you want to be thinking about your budget in terms of, okay, now we've bought the software, we've implemented it and got it to our MVP. Where are we going from here? How do we take it to the next level of value and the next level of value and the next level of value? Now, whether that's people you know, whether that's that you have in your team that you're skilling up, whether that's a third party that you're using, or whether it's vendor services or whatever it is, having a chunk of cash in the budget every year to help continually improve makes a massive difference, because otherwise I pretty much guarantee that the amount of companies I've gone and seen who have literally, they've implemented it, they've left it alone, 3 years later, everyone's annoyed with it. And then guess what? They go back to the beginning again, chuck it out, get another one, go round and round and round. So what do you think, Matt?
Yeah, I was going to probably cover off some of that in the product side of things, but I saw something on LinkedIn actually not long ago. A vendor of a product, doesn't really matter, some partner company, they were suggesting the level of growth or predicted growth of this company and the potential revenue that could be gained for a partner of this company for every unit license, right? So every unit license, there was a multiplier of P&C.
Yeah.
So my immediate is like, okay, so what are we telling the market? If you want to buy this product, the unit license price, you need this multiplier of X to be able to buy it, because you can't buy it and it sit there on the drive, as my Rolls-Royce analogy isn't really quite there at the moment. But I would normally have predicted like a budget to cover off things you're saying. 2x, 3x is realistic. I think buy the product, 2x, 3x is the space you want to be in terms of planning for the budget to do all the good stuff you need to get done. they were suggesting more like 3 or 4 times P&C on top of the license price. That, I assume, would be excluding the incumbent resource to support it, depending on your relationship. So my early estimations of 2 or 3 times budget for some enterprise tools is 3, 4, 5 times the license price. A good estimate, I think, honestly, is, depending on the product, depending on the complexity, I think a 3+X of your product spend is a realistic amount of budget to put aside for doing stuff with the product.
I would agree with that. And just to pick up on something you said there, right? There's 2 kind of parts to this. There is the product side, but there's also internally as well. Like if you want to get value out of a solution like this, like whatever it is, then the old way that you worked, you probably had, let's call them product administrators, who were there, who were
super admins. That's what they are, super admins. They don't exist anymore. I've looked.
No, indeed, absolutely. But you be thinking about, well, do I need a product owner? Which I know is something you're a massive fan of for whatever it is. And if I do, that's probably somebody I need to add in the budget. And then what are we doing for continuous improvement? Do I need some people to help me go and look at the business on a regular basis, say, are we achieving our milestones? What else can we do next? How do we turn that almost like an analyst from a set of the business has changed? How do we turn that into requirements? How do we get that into the product and start moving it forward? Those kind of things, right? It just occurred to me then that we're saying, right, there's a lot of things that you want to add into the budget. But these things you do add in ad hoc when you're halfway through programs and somebody said, oh, we really need to do this and yada, yada. It's often harder to get things done ad hoc. All we're saying is think about it in the first place and plan it out, and it'll be much easier for you as you go through your product change, I think.
100%. I just got one more to add on. I know we're probably going to drift away from the people side a bit now, but when like considering what the transition looks like, I feel like there's almost a what's the right word? Trying to like right size the idea what the project looks like yourself, and then allowing for a T&M type agreement to do the work, times and material, like how long will it take and I'll buy how many days.
Yep.
That might look better on paper to begin with. If you can get a nominal daily rate or X daily rates for the right kind of people, it might look better on paper to begin with, but it doesn't really cut to the chase and give a poignant end to what needs to be done. I feel like I've seen that so many times where that project and consulting and that T&M just rolls and rolls and, oh, this problem and it's more and more days, more and more days. So I think if you're going to go down the route to go and externally pay for the help to do it, through vendor, through partner, through whoever, I think a fixed deliverable around it, which seems like a really basic thing to say, but it doesn't always happen. But a fixed deliverable, what is it you're doing or when, what's delivered, how and why, who's doing it, what's the dependencies? That is super important in that transition, because too often the rolling project and consulting just takes place and this happened and this happened, change control here. So a super neat scope. That scope should be good enough that any decent consultancy, whoever's doing even the vendor, yep, we can do that. And then they take it on the chin if they don't get it done in time, which shouldn't really happen too much. Rather than it being, I'm going to save a few quid, I'll get my own contractors in, all that kind of stuff. And then you find a year later, you're still trying to roll out whatever the module is, or yeah. So I've seen that go wrong. I've been in the benefiting side of that as well. I ain't gonna lie, but that would be something to avoid rather than having a never-ending project. Not never-ending, but dragging.
So this is one of our favorite bits of the podcast where I get to disagree with Matt. We have a fun conversation. And I tell you the reason I think that is because it does depend on the tool, right? But quite often, I don't think people really understand the scope of their own environment that they're getting into. So I'm working with a large bank at the moment, for example, and when we started working with them, they said, this project is really simple. We've got this number of servers, this number of storage devices, this number of network devices. They don't have any subcomponents, blah, blah, blah. It's really easy. They're all in 2 data centers. Away you go. And I think 16,000, I think, was the number of CIs they said it were in scope. Currently, we're up to 144,000 CIs that we've discovered, and we're probably about 50% in, right? So sometimes customers don't know their environment well enough to be able to do that kind of fixed price deliverable that you're talking about, which I do agree makes things much, much easier for people if you can do that. But I think it's getting more complex as well, especially with like containers and cloud and whatever. It's just not easy to say it's going to look like this. Now, in some circumstances, it is. Like if you were doing ITSM without CMDB discovery and stuff like that, you could probably fix that pretty well. And something like log analytics, you could probably fix that, etc. But there are some bits that are going to be challenging, and that is a really good thing to add to our list of having a contingency in the budget, because if you're not sure exactly what you're getting, or exactly what you've got in scope, then you need to allow some money for that, because it's really hard to go back to your boss and say, hey, I thought the project looked like this, but actually it looks like this. And it was kind of, they asked us some questions, we kind of took a shot in the dark, and away we go. It's not ideal.
So I'm not even going to disagree with you, but it all comes down to like healthy scoping to begin with. You don't know those scenarios where you found another XX assets. That happens just the way it is, but that becomes new scope. So if I look at it from a project and a people perspective, like you've got the scope to deliver the 16,000. That is the scope of delivery. Deliver the 16,000. If another 100,000 come up, it's new scope. But it's much more controlled to have a scope of work to deliver X versus we'll have a bunch of days. Because if you give people days, they'll use days. You give them a scope of work and a timeline to get it done, they will get it done in that timeline nearly all the time, with some odd factors here or there. I think you're more so trying to get across, like, don't have a bucket of days to do a piece of work, have a really fixed scope. And if the person who's delivering the work, whatever that looks like, is competent enough, they should be able to give a reasonable estimate on what it's like. Getting a builder in. It's like getting a builder in. For now, for sure, I would never really do a daily rate for any tradesperson now, because I don't like the unknowing and the this and the that and what about this. I'd rather go, that's the work there, agree what the scope is, get it done. Then halfway through, you might go with the electrician, I need another 4 sockets here. That wasn't in the scope. It's going to be another 100 quid, 200 quid. Okay, cool. Versus like the never ending side of daily rate. Yeah, it's partly out of frustration, but also observation as well.
Yeah.
We're not disagreeing.
Yeah. One thing I've seen, and we're getting into the product side of stuff now, right, is that quite a successful model in bigger projects is to have that kind of scope there, but then also have let's call it a bucket of hours, that kind of thing that says, okay, we know some stuff is going to come up and we need some contingency for that sort of stuff. So let's just do that. And then when it comes up, we're there and we're not having to go back to the business and say, can we have a bit more money for this, or that, the other. It's worth thinking about, I think. Okay, so on to the product side then. So you've got a line item for what is probably a SaaS subscription these days for your product. You've got a line item for implementing the product. And now hopefully with some of the other stuff we've talked about, you've got a line item for some ongoing services, one, to help with contingency, but also secondly, to help you get more and more out of the product every single year. Other things you should be thinking about in the product space. Number one is obviously training, for sure. And you need as many people trained as possible, right? Because attrition is pretty high in IT at the moment. I was speaking to some CIOs at a dinner recently who were saying they were between 30 and 35% attrition. So don't just train the people that you need right now, train some extra people so that if they leave, you've got cover, and all that good stuff. And that, again, that's not just a you do it once thing. That's maybe a 6-monthly thing, because there'll be updates in the product and new things you need to do. So just keep making sure that your people are up to speed, they're certified, which will help. If they get certified, it will help them stay with you and stay with the project, because people tend to like that.
I've got an enhancement on top of that, like around training extra people or whatever else.
Yeah,
it's been like smart with what the operating model would look like in the future as well. I know this is evaluating people, but like the training side. So training more people, yes, there's a fine line there.
Yeah,
enabling people is probably a word I'd look to use, which would involve some training and some other stuff. But going outside of the core technical or tooling or blah blah blah, whatever the team is, and then going to the consumers of those products, whatever that product is, getting the consumers up to speed, enabled, trained, KT'd, whatever else, actually helps the operating model downstream as well, because we're able to like self-serve to a degree, do things to a degree, rather than trying to have a bunch of tooling people doing the supporting of whatever the thing is, federating that degree of responsibility with some control over permissions and all that kind of jazz. We're doing that to the stakeholders that use it. Then you end up with a revolving circle, almost a revolving door, where you've got the people that need to use a product can do more of the product because they've got access to do it. So they do more of the product, and they end up doing more of the stuff, which takes away from the need for the tooling team to be so big. So your federated model end up getting more value and better satisfaction because people can just genuinely do more, versus scenarios where Mr. Stakeholder needs X, it goes into the pipeline of activity and doesn't get delivered till Y, or because of the constraints on the delivery aspect of it. So if you can, for your training, enable the wider audience, the consumers of the product, you're going to get loads more value from the product.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. Okay, another piece I think often gets missed is integrations.
I was going to cover integrations, so okay.
Oh, wonderful.
You go.
Perfect. So the cost of integration is often two ways. So it's not just, if you were putting in a new tool and let's say you were integrating it into your ITSM tool, you'll have that new, let's say it's a discovery tool that you're integrating in, right? You'll think about, okay, how do I integrate my discovery tool in? But are there any costs on the other side, on your ITSM tool side? Does that attract some additional licensing for putting all these new CIs that are coming in there? And is there some training and work and maybe additional resource that the ITSM team will need to take and attribute to this project that they don't have today? And I see that on a very, very regular basis, that you end up then with a bit of conflict because the ITSM team don't have additional resources to bring to the project, and therefore you don't get as much value from the integrations as you would like. But also I had a project last year where somebody didn't realize that all these lovely new CIs that were being discovered and put into their service desk vendor was charging them for all those, and they suddenly got a bill and they went, oh, hang on a minute, we can't spend this. We're gonna have to stop the project. We can't do this. And it's like, wow, what a thing to have missed off the line items.
So definitely in the integration space, then it's the the time and effort to do a bunch of stuff in that integration. So add in the time and the conversations and the interactions needed. But then there's also, depending on what the integrations are, where it's coming from, where it's going to, there's going to be some inherent cost extra somewhere. It could be a cost of a transaction, the cost of the amount of noise or things or whatever else being sent. So there's that side of things.
Yeah.
But then also, depending on what that integration is, it might be going to a third party, external, something else. Now, when that takes place, do you have to take into consideration what that third party might now charge because you're doing something different? Like, how are you doing things now compared to before? Is that also a cost consideration in the integrated thing, whether it's a ticket going forwards or backwards, or a CI or a piece of automation? It's like the overall, we always talk about like the TCO. It's the overall TCO of that integration. It's not just the, or TCB, right? It's not just the transactional thing, it's the bigger picture. So integrations are a bit of a minefield because there's so many factors outside of your control, depending on what the integration is.
Yeah. Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I'm just thinking we've just rattled off half an hour there without even thinking about it. And there's probably a million other things we could talk about in this space. Matt, I don't know if you can see whether we've got any questions coming in from anyone that we need to address. I couldn't see any, but that might just be because I'm not very good at.
No, nothing yet. If that's anybody, if you've got any questions on anything we discussed so far, feel free to fire them in. Myself or Austin will pick them up. Yeah.
And if you're struggling to post them, ping us, message us on LinkedIn individually or whatever you can, and we'll try and pick them up. Okay. Are there any other things that you think we have missed that are major?
On the product side, I mean, your example you gave of the allowing extra funds for stuff, right sizing, like actually working out what it is you need, how far down the rabbit hole you're going to go with this transition, what of that product do you need and how much of it. Now, normal position is vendor will sell you as much as you like, but obviously you don't want to buy as much. But you're always, I feel, in that corner where you've got to buy so much because the deal's so good. But then what happens all the time nearly is you've got too much product. That happens more often than not. So there has to be like a really deep level of diligence, I suppose, that allows you to right size the thing that you're buying in the first place, buying the right amount. If it's a discovery thing, buy enough discovery units. If it's a service management thing, license it for enough people, including depending on the complexity of the license model or the modules that you want to use. But right sizing that product in the first place. Otherwise, through your transition, like your example you gave there, Austin, you uncover more stuff. You know, that particular customer there who had 120,000 or whatever, and you thought it was 16. Well, they've got 16 from somewhere, right? Maybe a trusted source or something. Well, surely there should have just been a small amount of diligence to just go blasting across the estate, scavenging for data to go, what else you got? There's Dave's spreadsheet, there's that product there, there's a discovery tool there, an old CDB there, and getting a big amount of data to go, that's more like it. But certainly, so discovery products are a bit of a minefield, really, because you're buying it for that purpose. It's a bit counterintuitive. But you got to do some diligence first. It doesn't have to be an expensive product. It could just be a right raggedy old spreadsheet, and you go fishing for data. But diligence and right sizing, that's the thing that doesn't happen all the time. And as you go through transition, oops, we've got to pay for this. Oops, this module. Oops, you needed that. Oh, you need another 100 people. What about this team? What about those licenses? What about, and it all builds up. Then your transition cost that you're allowed to do the stuff disappears because you've got to buy the stuff, and then you can't do the stuff. And then you're in this cycle where you hate the vendor straight away because you can't do anything, but the product is too expensive.
Yeah, you're correct. And that right sizing thing, right? Then you're thinking about trying to get away with an MVP in the first place and just doing what you need to deliver on the business outcomes that you wanted, but then also having the budget going forward to start to be able to take advantage of those other modules and things like that is definitely important as well. So, okay, right, we have talked about a lot today, so let me wrap up, and if anybody's got any questions, chuck them in the comments now. We'll talk about the cost of change. and we said, first thing is get really clear on what the business is trying to achieve, and what you need to, and whether you need to change. Could you go speak to your existing suppliers and get to the business outcomes that you need by working with your existing suppliers? And then we talked about people and product. So from a people perspective, don't just think about the architect and build, get the operate and run teams bought in early and the stakeholders bought in early. And are you going to need some additional resource there, people like product managers, analysts, etc., to help you in those early stages? Resource up early on new tools, instead of having to pay expensive third parties later. Get the people you need earlier, and build contingency into your budget. On the product side, we talked about training, having some contingency for product, not for product, for people, from a delivery perspective, from a vendor or a partner, having money to spend over the lifetime of the project. So 7 to 10 years potentially, to help you keep unlocking value from the product. Make sure everybody is trained, and that is not just your administrators, but it is the consumers as well. And then make sure that you understand the cost of integrations, not just the time and effort, but any potential other third-party vendor costs that might come in as well. That was a whistle-stop tour.
Very much. I just want to raise one tiny more thing around the potential people side of things. When you're planning that down, backwards, sorry, slightly. When you're planning that like operational day to day, whatever else, and that people, whatever it looks like, and you're looking at some sort of federated model, I think it is still okay to be basing some of that level of delivery on a third party service provider, vendor, or whatever else. But do that at this end, so your operating model is fast and straight into it versus last minute, we can't get anybody, we'll do this because you're paying premium. If you can get all that up front and negotiated, it helps a lot. And then at least you're going to have an easier transition into whoever needs to support you moving forwards. Sorry, a bit backwards there, but you're good.
Good. And we just had a question in, which is, how often do you see organizations using an enterprise service management tool and project tool, both running workload management and requiring double training? That is a really good question. And I think this comes in at the early stage of the project for me, when you need all the right stakeholders in the room in the first place, so that you can identify where we're already doing some of this stuff. And that's quite hard in a big organization, potentially, to have that. So identifying those right stakeholders so that you're not doubling up on workload would be probably my first tip, I think.
And then I've just refreshed the comments. There was a comment earlier from Stuart Dickin. There is also, this is our product one, I think. There's also consideration for billing type for license subscription versus perpetual. I've seen tool providers saying the subscription from day one rather than when the system goes live. I'm having those conversations myself, meaning the customer may be paying for 12 to 18 months plus of subscription costs without any return or even a usable system. I think more of a highlight in there. And that is a negotiation conversation, is it, depending if you're transitioning to a new product from a product, then I think there's a sensible vendor-based conversation to say, we don't want to be double billed at this point, or only when we're actually using it. And I think more often than not, it's software, right? So I think there's a good degree of sensible vendor conversations to have to say, this is when we'll start picking up the bill, rather than we bought it, deal's done, money's sunk, then you're stuck. So I think that is a negotiation-based conversation versus like a black and white answer, I think.
That's an interesting one. And I think from the other, seeing it from the other side as well, right? If you looked, and being totally transparent, on a vendor side, the majority of your support costs are early, right? When your customer doesn't understand the product yet and they're trying to implement and they're raising support cases left, right, and center. So actually it's more expensive in the earlier months than kind of in the later months. But there's definitely, I think most have flexibility in terms of saying, okay, well, you could contract from here, but maybe you don't start billing until later, potentially. But it doesn't mean there's no cost just because you haven't gone live, right?
Yeah, no, and that is appreciated. But you know what though? You probably test the character of the vendor you're dealing with depending on the outcome of that conversation quite early on.
Well, yeah, as I think we've talked about in previous sessions, is making sure you do have a great cultural fit with your vendor, and that's having those discussions is definitely one that helps you work out whether you're going to get through the rough and the smooth with them. Because the rough bits are going to happen with any project. So identifying whether you can work through those early on, preferably pre-contract, is definitely good. So
great. There was one more note which I missed earlier on. It's from Duncan, who was not able to join. Was using on the LinkedIn app, which I didn't know you could watch live through the app on the phone. So we know for future. And then I think you've answered Henry's one, haven't you? Responded to Stuart Just. And that was all the questions. However, if there are any other questions, I mean, right now, feel free to put them in. But for anybody else watching the playback, which I think it will be uploaded automatically in some point in the near future, pop the question in the comments because we're going to see it through the channel anyway. So once we see it, we can still respond to the questions. So if you do watch this afterwards, put the questions in and we can always come back to it at a later point. Or as Austin said, feel free to reach out to us direct, but I'm pretty sure you'll be able to ask most questions publicly.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you very much, my friend. How far have you traveled on our podcast today?
3,488, 89 steps. I don't know what that equates to. I don't normally count the steps either now. There you go, 1.39. I think that must be a mile. 1.39 miles, so not loads. But
very good. Much better than me sitting on one.
I've had some time off. I've got some extra stuff going on, not dramatically, but yeah, I need to up my game considerably at the moment.
We've all done that. It's been been a bit up and down with the weather in the UK, isn't it? But hey, summertime, there's more beers than usual. And
I'm just thinking for future, because obviously we had our earlier live and we had a couple of the releases. We've still got some recorded stuff to go out, and that will come out onto the channel, of course. We're going to be doing another live. We'll probably be a bit more consistent, I think, over the next few months, maybe every couple of weeks or one live a month. We've worked that out, but to be more consistent. We've got a series of ideas I think we're going to be starting to add on. So subjects and conversations, and also bringing in some guest speakers on occasion as well. But for anybody watching this, if there's certain topics that we either haven't covered off in an earlier recorded session, or we haven't talked about it that we're going to be releasing it, feel free to pop a comment on the page, pop a comment in the notes, message us. If you want to speak, you've got something to say, you're not trying to sell something, feel free to come on and we'll talk sensible subjects. I think some of the hot conversation topics at the moment, I think, are in the probably ITSM and asset space as a whole. But anything in the assurance, IOPS, that space as well. And of course, CMDB is a bit of a love child for us as well. So look, any topics, bring them to the table. We're happy to have a conversation about them because we've probably made a bunch of mistakes in those capabilities along the way.
For sure. And just had one last question come in from Henry before we close up, which is there a role for an agnostic broker to support businesses with large procurement exercises? We see it in buying houses and other personal contracts. Now, this is an interesting one. I've seen it in the past. And in fact, there are people like Gartner have their own practices for helping large organizations negotiate contracts with large vendors for big stuff. So there definitely is that's kind of stuff out there. I personally I think the role that is often missing is really helping clients understand what they are trying to achieve as a business, and therefore what their actual requirements are, rather than here is a load of technical things that we need your product to conform to. This is where we're trying to move our needle as a business, and this is what it means for IT, and therefore we need some tools that can help us get to these outcomes. I see that role is often missing, and I think there's space for that. I think, what do you think, Matt?
Yeah, to be honest, at first I didn't really understand the question, but I think you helped me navigate back into the right path. Yeah, get the so what sorted, and then worry about how you're going to transact on it. If you've got so what sorted, you probably don't need that level of support in the middle, because you know exactly what you're going to be doing. But if that support in the middle can also do that translation and help you close that, then there's weight in it. Because the only complexity of having that broker in the middle is a broker. Now, having like a mortgage broker is valuable because they're going to maybe find the deals that you can't find. So as long as they can provide value in that middle layer and not just take margin, which is more common, I feel, in our sort of space, it's that middle layer. Most of the time, I've heard the phrase fucking bullshit, value-added reseller. What absolute tosh is that? Most of the value-added resellers don't really add an awful lot of value. Happily come knocking on the door, take it to coffee or the golf course when the license renew is coming into play. But every other time, nah. So yeah, as long as that middle layer, whatever you want to call it, is delivering something, then yeah, up for it. If it's helping you translate the business stuff, great. If they're finding your deals, getting you figures that you can't get yourself, great. If not, not for me.
Apologies if you're working from home or in the car with your kids. Well, a parental guidance rating on any discussions we have that apparently involve value-added resellers in the future. But it's wonderful. So thank you very much for the questions, everybody. Matt, thank you for your expertise. Absolutely brilliant as always. And we will see you all on the next one very, very soon. Take care.
Also, Stuart's just commented on that last one. He said the broker can help you benchmark any deal, but they do need to be an independent and agnostic. That's a value. That's a valuable thing, because how often is that middle layer very, very closely aligned to a certain vendor? That's probably more common. So yeah, I can pretty appreciate that. But again, if they're providing value as well, there's a way up. But they've got to give something to the party, not just take a margin.
Agreed. Wonderful. Thank you very much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day and have a fabulous weekend. And we will speak to you all soon. Take care.
See you later.